everyone, welcome to this Carcanet book launch. Thank you all for being here. My name's Jasmine, I'm from Carcanet Press. We are of course here to launch Stephen Raw's Rust book, which is huge and very exciting. I'm very pleased to have my copy. So thank you for being here. We're joined by Stephen, of course. We're also joined by Mary Griffiths, our artist and curator, and we will be joined in a second by Carcanet's founder, Michael Schmidt. Before I hand over to him, I'm just going to run over some things that you probably know, especially if you've been coming to our launches. So tonight's going to last about an hour. Obviously, we can't see you, so please do find the chat box, say hello to us, let us know what you think of the event, get involved in the conversation. Later on, we do really want you to get involved, and we're going to have time for a Q&A. So if you guys could find a button that says Q&A, it's different from the chat. Pop any questions in there you've got for anyone, for Mary, Michael, or Stephen, and we'll be putting them questions to them later. So if you just get those lined up for us, that would be great. The last thing to know is that during the event, I'm going to screen share some stuff. You're in control of your own screen, so if it's not working for you or you want to reconfigure it, just have a play with it, and you can sort of usually drag it to the configuration that's best for you. Thank you all for paying £2 to be here. We really, really appreciate it. You will get £2 off a copy of the book. I'll drop that in the chat for you now, the code and the link. It'll come as an email as well tomorrow, so don't worry about that too much doing that now. Just check your emails and get in touch with me if you have any problems. So without further ado, I think we can move on, and I'm going to invite Michael on screen to get going.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Rust, the art gallery. This is the first time I've been responsible for launching an art gallery, and I'm very excited about it. It's going to become, I think, one of the major tourist attractions of Manchester. And we're visiting it virtually due to lockdown restrictions, but there are two people in the gallery who will be talking to us and showing us around it. And also we're launching today, as Jazz was saying, the Rust Gallery's first publication. It's a handsome landscape book where ferrous metal meets air and water. And what excites me about it is that it's pictures of the pieces that you won't see in the gallery. They were too big to transport into the gallery. And they're pieces that will, I suppose, be in the gallery when it moves into the Tate Modern in London. Thank you enormously for joining us. Carcanet has done only a handful of art books in its many years of existence, and this is one of the most beautiful, I think. And it celebrates not only Stephen Raw, but nature itself. You'll be meeting three people to show you around Rust, the art gallery, and through this handsome book. The first one is me, the publisher, and I'll be a kind of prologue and interlocutor. The second is Mary Griffiths, artist, curator, and honorary fellow of the Whitworth at the University of Manchester, whose book of drawings, Pictures of War, the Afghan and the Iraq War, Carcanet published in 2009, one of our earlier wonderful illustrated books. In that book, Mary wrote, I realized that the news images of battles, soldiers, ordinary Afghan roads on elephant tanks were so numerous that they were passing me by, seen but not noticed. Seen but not noticed. I like that phrase. I was in the midst of a war that was having no effect on my everyday life. It was then, in a deliberate attempt to see what I was being shown, that I began to make the drawings in this book. This weekend, Mary tells me her exhibition of birds, and more birds is opening at the Contemporary 6 Gallery next to the Town Hall. It's entirely made up of drawings and paintings of birds by me, Sue Platt, and Liam Spencer, she says, and it is a joyful show marking the beginning of spring and the sense of some light at the end of the tunnel. I, for one, can't wait to see it. But the star of tonight's show, as you all know, is the launch. This launch is Stephen Raw. He's been seeing and making things for a very long time. He's been making numbers. I think that was the beginning of his career in lettering, then letters, and then words, and then sentences. His spelling has improved latterly as well. He's also been choosing and curating in his most recent period. His website, www.stephenraw.com, is in Aladdin's cave, a record of a life richly spent among things made and latterly among things found, singled out, changing form and shape, changing their nature. He's now in his rust period. What I love about Stephen's art is that it's public. I happened on a quote from John Ruskin, or Rustkin, as we must call him, and he wrote, rusted is living, polished is dead. I ran this by Stephen and he nodded his curls sagely. He agreed, this is the case. Stephen, it's now almost irrelevant to say, went to various art schools in London where he grew up. He mentions in particular Wimbledon and Ravensbourne. And then he came to Manchester for an MA and forgot to go home. He became a lecturer in graphic design at Manchester Poly, as it then was, and he went for 2 years to Papua New Guinea to teach. On his return, he became self-employed, working for publishers on their cover designs. In 1984, he transformed Carcanet from a letter-set operation, which I was not very good at, to a bespoke publisher. Our books began to look handsome and distinctive, and they had a raw aspect for many years to come. His design world was shaped and sized by the book, the Demai Octava book in particular. He explored beyond his medium and he loved to make language visible. My flat here in Manchester is full of his work, and so is our Carcanet office, huge pieces and tiny ones. Often this work was at a scale that was difficult to execute. He hired bigger studio spaces where he could stretch his watercolor rolls of paper to sizes in excess of 12 feet long. But there was, as well as the book, another restriction imposed on him. What he produced could not exceed 4 meters in length, otherwise it wouldn't fit into his Mercedes van. As well as publishers, he has worked for the Royal Mint, for Manchester Cathedral, where his spectacular organ is on display. He has designed stones in Westminster Abbey for P.G. Wodehouse and for the Royal Ballet founders, and he works closely with Caroline Duffy, including a large exhibition of her poetry in the Queen's Gallery, Edinburgh, halfway through her laureateship. Stephen, I'd like to introduce you now so you can thank our audience. There are the curls.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that flattering invitation. Yes, introduction. Can I say a big thank you to everybody who has shelled out the £2 to join this launch of the book and the gallery, more of which in a moment. Some other people will get a particular mention as I am asked various questions. Okay.
Let me start by asking you the obvious question. How did the gallery come about? I was going to say why, but I think how is probably a better question, knowing how eccentric you are.
Yeah. My studio is next door, and I don't know, but for some unknown reason, I decided one day to paint some bookshelves I have, a lovely pristine white, so that I could show off some of the rust objects I had, either kicking around at home or in my studio, to better effect. And then visitors came along and we had lovely conversations, and some of them realizing about the aesthetic of rust as I do. And I suppose I thought of it as a sort of cabinet of curiosities. And I love the German word, the Wunderkammer, probably pronounced very badly for that. And so there were lots of conversations that started.
Well, that's exciting. It's quite a leap from a cabinet to a gallery. It's a leap worthy of the founders of the Royal Ballet, whom you have commemorated in stone.
Well, fairly early on, actually, with my shelves, I was frustrated by the scale. I couldn't get some of the larger pieces in that I had already collected. And then also there wasn't enough space for them to be displayed in all their glory. And so I had the idea, wouldn't it be a good idea to make a sort of white cube thing and then show them off as best as possible.
And when did the opportunity to go from a cabinet to a gallery come about?
Well, that's hard to say. I've been working away there in the studio, and this was a storeroom. It's an old boiler room. In fact, behind me, probably in the dark, you can't see. Over there is a coal chute, because the building's 100 years old, and there was a big steam boiler in here, which is why the roof's full of soot. And I had stored some things. There was a whole lot of church sort of junk in here as well. And I thought if I knocked down some of the brick walls that I'd used to support the boiler, I could get a space and maybe some enough space. And also stored in the storeroom were these old disused MDF boards. So that actually became reused, and a friend of mine put them in, and then another friend, my friend John Rattray, he painted them all beautifully white. And so I had my sort of white cube. There was one thing, and this is going back to the beginning of last year. So I had my white cube, and then lockdown. COVID arrived, and to be honest, a good friend of mine, Philip, was a very early victim of COVID. In fact, he died on the day of lockdown, which is an indication of how late lockdown was. And I, like lots of people of my age and so on, it was no guarantee we were going to survive. Philip had died. So I thought, if I was on a ventilator, and I would be really cross with fate that I hadn't got my gallery together and people would only see white walls. So I came back here, and knowing no one was going to look at them or see them, I put up all the objects ready for whatever. And so here we are, well over a year later. Some people came in partial lockdown in the summer. Stella and Mary herself walked from Chorlton to see it, and that was very encouraging. And Barry Wood, my friend, came as well. And I found all these lots of lovely conversations and encouragement. And then I made the book, which is there behind me. It's A3 format. And I showed that to you, Michael, and your response was, let's publish it. And here we are tonight.
It is a very beautiful book. Should we show off a few pages of it?
Yes, if Jazz can.
Jazz, are you there to?
Oh, here we go.
The Ding an sich. Oh, it's gorgeous. This is the big book. Or no, this is a title page, isn't it?
Yes, yes. So here we have some pieces, as Michael says, which are too large. I like your comment that they'll be all right in Tate Modern. What about the Turbine Gallery?
Yes, the Turbine Gallery.
Yeah, here we see some of this texture I keep going on about, and the color, of course. And some of the pieces are very flat, and some of them are become very sculptural.
When you fall in love with rust, you do actually begin to see wonderful examples of it around, don't you? And I keep wanting to bring them back to you. Are you going to have changing exhibitions within the gallery?
Well, already I have found, even in this year, I found some bits which are so lovely that I've changed them. I've changed them around. So yes, I suppose it will change.
Do you caption them? Do you caption them?
Well, in conversation with Mary, I should be doing proper labeling with acquisition numbers and all these sorts of things. So, and provenance, of course. I will get round to that in the end because it's because I'm terribly serious about it.
Well, people will like to know that as a gallery, you do have a gallery shop. I haven't seen the shop, I haven't seen the gallery yet either. And the gallery shop, you can buy wonderful things like this. You can get little pieces of rust, and it says on here, this certifies that these are authentic pieces of rust from Rust the Art Gallery, and it's signed by none other than Stephen Raw. And it's really rather charming. I'm not sure what to do with it, but I have it, and I shall keep it and treasure it for the rest of time.
That's quite right. Well, in the gift shop, which we'll talk about in a moment, there's something for all pockets. You see, the authentic rust is $4.99. Okay, so where are we now?
Well, I have one more question before we. Yeah. Well, one major question. At first, you called your gallery a museum, and I thought that. So I was telling you about it, Rust the Museum. I think it sounds more sort of resonant, like the Hat Museum in Stockport and so on. The Rust Museum in Manchester, we now have competition, although you don't have a chimney. But suddenly you changed it to gallery. Why was that?
Well, in these conversations, it is a very good question. It was called indeed the Museum of Rust, and there was even tickets here. Here's one of these tickets, big collector's item now, because admit one. printed by my friend Joe Britcher on this wonderful stuff letterpress in things that you have beer mats made of. So the Museum of Rust celebrates the color, texture, and sculpture created when ferrous metals react. I had in those days react to air and water. But I realized, my thinking was that a museum is partially about conservation. And I had begun to realize that I actually was welcoming the rusting process. So, conservation has no part to play, as far as I can see, in this. And the pieces of rust that are falling off all the time from the exhibits, I began to hoover up, specifically in a bag dedicated to those little pieces. And it's you'll see it in the moment in the video. It's hanging up behind the door. So it's a bit of a faff to change over from one bag to another, the general Hoover. It's a Henry Hoover bag, but nevertheless, in that bag, all the exhibits will eventually end up. And I sort of think it's a rather wonderful and, dare I say, poetic example of entropy.
Yes.
I think perhaps, Jazz, if we have the little video, which we'll have a proper tour. Here we go.
Here it goes.
So this is the entrance to the gallery. I'm just going to hurry on through the main hall just to show you where it all started. And that was with this cabinet, or these bookshelves, painted white. As you can see, the space there is quite restricted. I do want to show you this as one of my favorites. I don't know exactly what it is, a combination of rust and some other product, oil or paint or something in this can. Absolutely nothing left of any information, and even the top is going very, very nicely. It sits next to this slightly geometric thing here, but it's still rusting and flaking in a very interesting way. I'm not going to talk about all the objects, but I do want to show you this one, because I think I hoovered up here maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and already in that time pieces have fallen off. It's not under any stress, they've just fallen off, ready to be hoovered up and put into the dedicated Hoover bag. So I'm going to start over here, and here's a wonderful sort of shape that's created, inviting you in to this thing here, with its interesting sharp edges in comparison. It sits next to this piece, which is so important, it's absolutely seminal, that it has its own alcove, and it is a transformed something into a piece of sculpture, a piece of rust sculpture, and it invites people to perambulate around to see how it changes, and it has become something completely different, of course. It's something else that's inviting you inside this piece here from Ardner Merkin. It's in the book. It sits next to this one, which is obviously some sort of canister, but it's going quite well at the top here, and it has a lovely variation on colour when we look close. But I always invite people to touch it to feel the texture here, and this you can feel it's a rib still here. It was found on a beach on the Ross of Mull, and I got lucky because I found some rope discarded by some trawlermen and managed to make this thing into a sort of rucksack and haul it back over 2 miles of boggy Scottish moorland to get it back to the van. In the corner there is another important piece. It's in an alcove. Sometimes reminds me of a sort of Anglo-Saxon find or a part of a Viking sword. It still has its wooden shaft on, hanging there. This is another very sculptural piece, but I don't invite people to touch this one because it's very delicate. It would just fall off. creating quite an interesting shadow actually on its very special plinth. And it's next to a very mundane object, obviously an aerosol. Won't be surprised if lots of people who are interested in rust have something a bit like that in their collections. And this one here, not sure how this has survived this piece at the end of its shaft here. It sort of sometimes reminds me of a deep sea fish, a very odd shape. This is the slideshow. It's on mute at the moment with lots more photographs than in the book, and people can sit there and watch, have a happy 10 minutes watching those slides. And nearly at the end of the tour, there are some actual pieces for sale, which the trustees hope will keep the gallery going. There's also prints that are available from the book. They're much larger format, and they are of course signed by the senior curator. Now behind the door, before I forget, is the actual Hoover bag, and this is the one I change to when I'm specifically hoovering up those small pieces of rust that the objects are shedding. Now, people will have come in from the right, but I'm hoping they will exit on the left, because that is exiting via the gift shop, and this is it. It's actually my studio, and here are some of the objects. I think I've just crashed into some of the other pieces that are, of course, not on exhibition. Perhaps they're awaiting or whatever. And here are some of the framed pieces, which will be for sale, and celebrating the colour and the shape of rust. Some people might like to buy them and take the glass off so that you can indeed feel the rust. Sometimes these are very expensive to frame, so I've just put up these here speculatively if people are interested. And so that is the end of the tour, and it's back to Jazz or Michael.
Wow, Stephen, that's a very impressive tour. Thank you. Is it true that you have a list of sponsors you would say thanks, but no thanks to?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yes, you're right. Shell Oil, I'd say no, because it's just too controversial. I mean, they're in a lot of trouble, both ends of that sponsorship, BP Oil as well. Gazprom, I wouldn't touch them. They're too, well, I know they're big sponsors of the European League and all that sort of thing, but frankly, they're too Russian. I think Tata Steel are sniffing about. Apparently, word is that they're interested in it because of their rust wash policy. But if the Arts Council come begging, I'll give them time. Yeah.
You had a nice endorsement this morning from Anthony Gormley, so that's good. Can you show it to the camera? Can you just hold it up?
Hang on.
It's very nice of him to write. He is a wonderful maker of items that will rust, I suspect.
Indeed, and there on the other side is one of his little figures. Of course, yes. I mean, they're all cast down, so yeah. So it's very nice.
I was showing the book to my son Charles, who's in the Merchant Navy, and he thought you ought to come aboard one of his cable laying ships to expand your collection.
I'd love that.
And it put me in mind of that poem you sent me by the late T.R.B. Watson of the Corrosion Services Company in Toronto, which has the lines, "Mighty ships upon the ocean suffer from severe corrosion. Even those that stay at dockside are rapidly becoming oxide. Alas, that piling in the sea is mostly Fe2O3. And where the ocean meets the shore, you'll find there's Fe3O4, because when the wind is salt and gusty, things are getting awful rusty." Where do you find the best rust? I think you do believe there is a best rust, don't you? Because you've got some amazing
pieces. So. It's a good question. I sort of wondered why I wasn't getting anything collecting over the decades, anything sort of locally, so farm in Lancashire or Cheshire, going out walking. And I came to the conclusion that because we are frequent visitors to the west coast of Scotland, particularly to the Isle of Mull, this is the best place. And when you think about it, of course, something has to be, it must have time. It must have time to rust. And so it mustn't be tidied up. You know, probably a farmer's had lots of rusty things in the corner of his barn or her barn and in a field or something and thrown it away into a skip. So it must have time, and it must have good weather, and of course, lovely wet west coast of Scotland. And the best water is seawater. So tides bringing things in and out, ideally, and then on a beach, and a very remote beach that nobody's going to go to, like the canister here. Don't know how many years that was transforming. And then, so there are those things. And then the final thing I worked out was, in fact, you need some sort of transport. You need a van. Now, if we had a very smart sort of camper van, one might not want to put rusty objects in case it spoilt the lovely seating and fabric. So that was the last piece of the jigsaw.
Is this the same van that conveys your large works of watercolor art?
It is, but I have to say it's on its way out. And one of the problems is rust, would you believe? I'd love it to have time somewhere else in a field and then eventually come back, either as a whole thing or in pieces. That'd be good.
I would love it if now Mary Griffiths could join us. And I know you're socially distancing, so you're disappearing into the background. And here's Mary in the foreground. Thank you for coming along, Mary. It's wonderful to see you. And I'm glad you're socially distancing in the proper fashion. My first question is, the difference between museums and galleries isn't as hard and fast as Stephen makes it out to be, is it?
That's right. There's, for a long time now, in very dreary museological circles, there's been a lot of debate about what museums and galleries are. And then there's been this use of the umbrella term for museums across public art galleries and museums, which started in America, and now maybe about 20, 30 years ago, curators in Britain started calling themselves museums as well, even if they had gallery in the title. I think there's a difference, though, between public museums and galleries, and of course, artist-run galleries, and then, of course, commercial galleries. And those three groups have slightly different approaches to objects and works of art that they have in either in their collections or in their building. So I think this is one of the things that Stephen's playfully pointing out here in the museum, in the Gallery of Rust, sorry. But one of the ways I was trying to think, what do I think the difference between a museum and a gallery is? And I'd say a museum is a place that nobody intends anything to go into a museum. Nobody makes anything for a museum. That would be a terrible thing to do, wouldn't it? To just to damn something straight away to the museum. Whereas everything in an art gallery an art gallery is an entirely appropriate place for those things that are made as art to go to. Those things will either go to people's homes or offices or to the art gallery. So I think that's a good way to differentiate between these two things.
You say made as art, but are these things made as art? These things, unless nature is the artist?
Yes, well, I think that's one of the things. So in conversation with Stephen and then looking again at what he's done here, the question is, and I've asked him this as well, so maybe he'll have thought of another answer for this, is here he is, he's brought all of these things together. So who is the artist? Is Stephen the artist? Is the first maker of this, what was a gas canister, the artist? Or is it a collaborator? Or is Stephen the curator cum artist? Curators aren't artists. What they do is endorse art that's shown in their galleries, like a publisher will endorse poetry that they decide to publish. But so here's Stephen, he's brought all of this into this room. He's selected it out in the field in Scotland or wherever he's found it. So he's the one who's selected, he's the one who's identified something artistic about it and changed its location, created this white cube here. And then there's the question, is he the artist? Is nature the artist? Is it in some kind of collaboration with him? So I think that's the fun, interesting area that needs to be examined more. That's what he helps us examine with these examples of rust that he's brought here into Manchester. And then one other point about this as well, there he is, he's created this white cube, and here we are, as he pointed out quite clearly, we're standing in a boiler room. So we're standing in an industrial setting, but above us is a church. It's the boiler room of a church. So we're in a white cube, and white cube galleries are, of course, another version of the Protestant whitened church with words on the wall rather than polychromatic walls of the Catholic Church, of the pre-Reformation Church. So nice areas to play with there.
I must say, when we went into the shop in that film, I was exceedingly attracted to some of those framed bits of rusting material. I mean, they did look like art. They didn't look like artifacts. And I was wondering whether, when we put some object in a frame, do we somehow change its nature?
Yes, I think of course, there's that selection, that moment of selection that I was talking about earlier on. But then the actual the display that we enter into in a place like this, of course, begins to make all of those signals to the viewer that it's art in some way, that it's not anymore, that it's lost its meaning as the gas canister, and it's transformed here somehow by being on a plinth with the white walls. And all of that language of museums that's endlessly, and people write endless, rather poor MAs around this, or build an entire career on examining the display techniques within museums. But of course, that's what I spent 30 years doing, actually carrying out that practice and thinking about it, about how those signals are made. So yes, indeed, Stephen, when he's framed pieces of rust, as though it's almost a photograph or a painting of rust, indicates something to us. And then the other things that he's beginning to participate in here are to do with, there's the display, there's the provenance of those things, which would be the lineage in the museum world. It's not just the location it's come from, but the actual lineage of that. So the provenance of this gas canister, which you might be able to see here, would begin with the designer of it, the place where it was made, and then all the subsequent owners, so the first dealer who shipped it into some other yard where it was sold off to somebody else. So all of those names would be marked in some way, and the penultimate one, of course, would be the owner at Ardner Merchant, who left it in the corner of a field to rot, and then Stephen Raw, who picks it up. So there's that long lineage that gets expressed in museums and public galleries. And then something that he's begun to develop is this idea of how he's going to interpret these works. First of all, display is the first form of interpretation. He has a video playing here in the gallery, and of course, the book itself, that's his prime form of interpretation, I'd say, at the moment.
Do you think they're a bit like ballads? Because you talk about the origins and so on, and like as with the ballad, there's a lot we can't know. They are almost like folk art, which is rather weird. I mean, they're extraordinarily beautiful. When I saw the pictures, I was just ravished by them. I thought, we don't need artists anymore. We've got nature.
Can I just say that in conversation with Mary about who was the artist, I was being grilled really quite hard about not being the artist, not feeling I was the artist.
Oh, no, that's giving the wrong impression. That's suggesting that I was saying he wasn't the artist. I was saying he was the artist.
Yeah. And I was saying that no. However, I think we came to a compromise, and I made a note of it. So it's okay. It's a collaborative work of art, and the collaborators are the weather, the sea. I think we've got to put in material, the time, and the curator. So I'm okay with that one. And as Mary just mentioned about the Ardner Merchant farmer, who, if there was one, we got into a very interesting discussion about repatriation, about the Benin bronzes going back to Nigeria, and the Elgin marbles, of course, and all of that. And I said I was happy for anybody to repatriate, say, a particular piece to Scotland, so long as it went into a gallery that was as serious about rust as this one is. but that's not good enough for Mary. Repatriation is it doesn't matter what people do with it. And then there was spoliation and all of that sort of. So it's brought up all sorts of interesting, or very, very interesting things. I didn't know about the politics of display and the culture of display. That's because I don't know much about curating, to be honest.
But you're learning. I know that that Mary had a hand in some rust work, didn't you? Didn't you have to rust a pistol or a gun for a Cornelia Parker exhibition that you curated?
I did, for a big show that I did for the reopening of the Whitworth in 2015. I worked with Cornelia for about 4 years. And one of the things that she wanted to work with the Whitworth because part of the University of Manchester, and there's all of those different scientists and engineers that you can easily get your hands on. And one of the things that she wanted to do was to get a gun and rust it away, and it was to end up being a pile of rust. So my job was to get the gun and arrange for its rusting. Fortunately, one of my friend curators in the Whitworth, her uncle had been very high up in the police force, and he was able to put us in contact with the firearms section of Greater Manchester Police, who provided us with a handgun. Well, first of all, we met them at Salford University, and they presented us with the handgun, and we had a shotgun as well that they got us. And then in front of us, this was part of their process of decommissioning of these firearms. In front of us, with saws, with electric saws, they cut up these guns to decommission them so that they couldn't actually function as firearms anymore. So those were our guns. We took them away in a little children's haversack. And then I took them to the university, and I'd already made friends with people in the engineering department, and took the handgun to them and said, well, we'd like this rusted. And he said, well, how rusted do you want it, Amelia? Do you want it sort of slightly decomposed in some way? No, we just want a pile of rust. So he did an accelerated form of rusting for that. Basically, he put it in a drawer, which presumably probably created that kind of microclimate of those conditions that Stephen described earlier on, to do with moisture and humidity, well, the humidity and probably a bit of heat, and maybe a bit of salt. And then by the end of that, he had to grind down a little bit of it because we needed it for the exhibition. And then by the end of it, we were presented with a bag of rust, which he described as precipitation, which is part of the process of de-engineering iron and steel. So then I had the bag of rust and was able to give it to Cornelia. And this was the process that we went through a lot. She had asked for something. I'd somehow get it through people at the university and then hand her materials. And she then made the work of art. So she imagined the idea of making something out of the decommissioned gun, wanting the rust. She had made pigments out of strange materials before, snake poison and antidote and blood. And this became, one of the things she did with it was to use it as a red pigment. So did some drawings with that rusted down gun. And then the other thing that she did was just present in a very beautiful cabinet that we made at the Whitworth for her, a nice pyramidal pile of rust, which then was given the title Precipitated Gun. Yes, so that's my rust.
Very good. Well, you've already, Stephen, occasioned one work of art in the form of, you mentioned Barry Wood, who is a dear friend of all of us and is also a wonderful teacher. And he, I believe, has provided you with some rust haiku, which is very exciting. You said he'd been to the gallery already, so he had the occasion.
Yes, he's the tutor of an ongoing poetry class, and I asked them to tell me if they knew any poems about rust, and there weren't that many, to be honest. There's T.S. Eliot quote from Rhapsody on a Windy Night, includes 3 lines: a broken spring in a factory yard, rust that clings to the form that the strength has left, hard and curled and ready to snap. And then there were others. You've read one out already, Michael. There's William Carlos Williams, which you're going to read.
Oh yes, yes. We have the text of it, don't we? I think Jazz has the text of it. There we are. Except when you put it there, it actually destroys Michael. Here we are. So Rust.
No song.
I'm just getting my copy. Here we are. Russia, Russia, you might say, and furrow the brow, but I say, there are flowers upon the railroad embankment, woven by growing in and out among the rusted guard cables lying there in the grass. Flowers daisy-shaped, pink and white in this September glare. Count upon it, there will be soon a further revolution. There will be soon a further revolution. It's a wonderful little political poem, isn't it? About, really about the place of Rust in history.
Yes, and I have to mention that a long time ago I did his the 2-volume collected poems, William Carlos Williams, when I was designing, and one of the covers has a photograph of rusty chain, and I didn't know that poem was in there. I just liked my photograph of a rusty chain.
That didn't make it into the book, did it, Stephen? It's an old photograph. Is that the reason?
Yes, it is. Well, no, it's not quite. It wasn't quite rusty enough for these purposes.
Okay.
Sorry, we're gonna and Barry very, very kindly, apart from doing his own trawl, he was inspired to write a poem, as you say, haikus, which he's recorded for us.
This is a poem dedicated to Stephen Raw. It's called Rust Haikus, a modest postmodern intermezzo. It starts with a line from Morton Feldman, slightly misquoted. Decay is the sound of life, or rust, the oxidization of iron and steel, the silent music of decomposition, or the quiet metamorphosis of a life of change. A red wheelbarrow tin, anticipating fruition and fall, falling, slow death, and gradual resurrection, birth, and innovation. The necessity of art. Quick, catch its living rust.
Thank you so much, Barry. That's a lovely inaugural poem, if you like. Barry can be the first Rust laureate. Do you think that's okay? Is that post open at the moment, Stephen?
I'm sure it is. Yes, there's a laureate for everything, isn't there? Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, Barry.
You also discovered, before we move on to our questions, because I think we seem to have some which will be read for us by Jazz. You pointed out that Rust has found its way into popular music, hasn't it? There's the Neil Young album called Rust Never Sleeps, and another one you found which sounds even more exciting, which is the Carnival of Rust.
Yes, in my research I found, of course, I was attracted to something called the Poetry of Rust, and it wasn't, as it were, poetry. It was a band in Massachusetts who record music, sort of scraping metal, including rust. And I wish I'd got permission to let you hear a minute of that. I can post that on my website if anybody wants to. That was quite interesting. All sorts of things. I only learned this morning that hashtag Rust, there are 2 million followers. So that, you know, Rust is, I'm pushing an open door, I think.
It was also, your poetry group produced one other rather nice little poem of 2 quatrains, didn't it? Nothing is so beautiful as rust. It spreads and spirals, sparkles in the sun. And yet, of all the things you'll find discussed, I guess you'd rarely come across this one. He goes on, and that's a shame because there's little doubt that rust creates a captivating vision. And saying that, the best way to find out is visiting Stephen's splendid exhibition.
Well, we must credit
approximate rhymes there, but
Harrop, who's a member of Barry's class with his creation. Thank you, Dudley.
Jazz, can we go over to the questions now? Have you got any exciting questions lined up for Stephen and Mary?
Yes, I do have some
Mary,
questions.
come back into screen. Where are you? Mary has disappeared.
On the way.
There she is. Good. You can both be in focus.
So firstly, thank you guys for a really interesting discussion. I'm going to read out a comment that someone put in the chat. I don't think everyone could see. So Linda Topping just wanted to say that Chorlton Arts would like to thank Stephen for being its patron. So Linda's here and wanted everyone to know that. So thank you, Stephen. So on to our questions. We'll start with Olga, would like to know, Stephen, are you planning on exhibiting other artists who are working with Rust?
The short answer is no, I'm not planning that at all. People are encouraged to an extent to submit pieces of Rust for exhibition. Of course, these items have to go in front of the curatorial committee, and then they get approval from the trustees, of which, of course, I am the chair. And I also haven't said that I'm also the security officer. Just throw that one in, sort of many hats. And yeah, so they won't. Some people have given me some things, and frankly, they weren't rusty enough. So you know, I have to be hard-hearted and tell people they're crestfallen inevitably. But no, it's going to carry on like this.
So I suppose you've never been tempted to get the engineering department involved?
No, not yet.
Well, because Anna would like to know whether you've ever had the temerity to alter any pieces by removing any little bits here or there.
That's a good question, and I think the answer is probably, but not a lot. I mean, really, everything is there. I mean, some things. So I had some sheets of fabulous Rust, and I wanted to get them in. Here's one, and I probably bent it to make it. I mean, just look at that. Isn't that just absolutely wonderful? Just, I don't know if it's in focus. Mm-hmm. That's on display in the cabinets. But no, I don't have to really. I'm going to admit that this did indeed fall off the plinth at one point when I was moving the plinth, and so it you know, it suffered accordingly.
It developed somewhat. So I have a question here that I think, well, it kind of goes back to some of the conversations you were having earlier. So Mary, you'll probably have something to say about this as well. But Ivan is interested in when or what turns Rust into art?
That's definitely Mary's question. What turns Rust into art?
But then I just bounce it straight back to Stephen, because he's the one who's identified these things and selected them. So I think it would be, the question to you would be, well, what's the beauty that you see in Rust that makes it artistic?
It is those things I keep bashing on about, which is the color, texture, and the sculpture. That has some sort of an aesthetic which appeals to me and lots of other people as well. Which is why, you know, when the very, very few people who have been here have beaten a path to its door, and I hope that lots of people will when we're all allowed to come here and see the physical objects. That they will enjoy that as well. I suppose another short answer is what makes it art is partly because I've put it on the walls. That makes it art. That, you know, going back to Michael's very early question about, you know, what happens to a piece of Rust when this happens to it. Mary, in conversation, of course, says all about the viewer and about what the viewer makes of it.
So there's one other thing I'd add as
well.
well.
Go on.
Yeah? I think that moment might be because its original function is lost, and because of the decay it's going through, and its original function is lost. And then because of the shift into the gallery that Stephen's made, Its meaning as its first object is gone. It's that thing where you stare at it trying to work out what it was. But its new meaning, it gets revivified by becoming art. Well, the revivification as something else, so to find a different meaning of beauty within it, then that's where it becomes the art, because of that total shift of meaning.
Yeah.
Can I say something? And looking at the exhibition items that I can see at the moment in your camera's view, one of them seems to me to be not art. It seems to me to be wrong. It doesn't look like a piece of art, and that is the wreath, as it were, that's on the wall there. That it just looks like a roll of rusty barbed wire. It hasn't, the transformation hasn't occurred, because in a sense, it has kept what I take to be its original form with too much integrity.
That's a fair comment, Michael. Yeah, I'm not quite sure, but in one sense it's rusted enough. It's certainly no longer useful as barbed wire, but it would be much nicer if you couldn't tell. But I don't know what it would look like if you couldn't tell it was barbed wire. So
I think you put it there because of the shape. I think you needed a circle, and it's a nice round shape. The others all look to me like they have been created, whereas that looks to me as though it's just been neglected.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that helps me think that. So it is definitely this losing of its original drive. That story I told you about the Cornelia Parker gun. So that work where the gun was lost completely, it still had the title of gun within it, but there was the new work created from that idea. And I think Stephen can see in himself that some of those things in here, where it's losing it more, they're the more successful sculptures, aren't they?
Yeah.
But if you gave it a title like Christmas or Funeral or something like that, then the title would ironize what it is in a curious way. But again, that would be too much of an intrusion by the curator, I suspect.
That's the poet in you speaking, Michael. Wanting to get a label like that.
Just the ironist, not the poet.
Well, I mean, I suppose this does lead quite neatly into another question we've got here, which is James is asking how this kind of passion for rust and this involvement with rust has influenced your practice elsewhere. So your work with language, and whether you're this is someone else's question as well. I'm sort of combining two here. Also, so you're interested in lettering as well. So are these practices coming together in some way?
I'm not quite sure. I'm really pleased someone's asked me that question, and I have slightly, in case someone did, I've got something that might show. I will show it, and it's about texture, and this is a recent piece. I'll show you the size of it. It's an acrylic textual piece. It's called Lest We Forget, and it's all about the shambolic pandemic government we had before. I sort of didn't want the vaccines to make people forget. So it's a long list of things. So that's the context. I'll show this as close as I can. Can you see a sort of texture there? It's acrylic paint put down with a palette knife, and oops. So that's one thing. And then in the pandemic COVID lockdown, I sort of had a note, my sketchbook, I call it my pandemic sketchbook. And I went back to art school for myself and did monoprints. And I think that also, that why I delight in monoprints is, I don't know if you can see that. There are various textures and so I think why I like that is something to do with all of this. I'm not quite sure. I haven't unpacked it completely, but the answer is I hope so.
Great, thank you. We are running out of time, so I'm just going to put one very short final question to you, and it is from Joy, who asks, have you considered the possibility with your aging Mercedes van of a mobile rust gallery?
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, I you know, Michael's little hint about a sort of tape, of course, that's just fantasy. but it would be quite interesting, I think, if the whole thing, because it's so small and perfectly formed, it would actually, if you actually knocked it down, fit inside the Mercedes van, which is rusting as it goes on its way. I mean, it's all sort of integrated. I asked Mary in one of our conversations about, was this an art installation? And I think you said it wasn't an art installation, which could be moved about. And because it's different every day because something's fallen off, it's more of a, what did we come up with? A slow kinetic event or something, didn't we?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So that's harder to move about, but yeah, I like the idea. Thank you, Joy, whoever you are.
Well, I mean, I think that brings us to time. So all that remains to be said is thank you and congratulations, Stephen, on the opening of your gallery and the publication of its catalogue.
Bravo, bravo.
Oh, perhaps you should tell us to close how we might visit the gallery.
Oh, yeah, yes. Anyway, just before I'd like to, massive thanks to Mary and to Michael, of course. But Mary, we've been having conversations in preparation for this, and it's just been wonderful and marvelous.
In gardens too, haven't you? You've been in gardens
with Stella as well. It's been great. Just email me, really. I mean, I'm not here every day in my studio, and when I am, I will be welcoming people. And I think, isn't it May the 18th or something when the gallery
23rd? It's certainly in May. Don't approach Stephen before you're legally able to, or they'll close the gallery immediately.
Yeah. Oh yes. No, we'll have to have it fully functioning with health and safety and everything done. But yes, email me for some opening times, which I think basically I'm going to put some up on the website. Otherwise, I'll be answering lots of emails
and telephone calls.
Trying to. Thank you, Jazz.
So thank you all for coming so much. This has been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. I'm putting the link for you to buy a copy of the book in the chat box. There's also a discount code for you. That'll come as an email tomorrow. So just check your inbox if you want to buy a copy of the book, and get in touch with me if you've got any problems with that. Finally, please join us next Wednesday. We're going to launch a new poetry collection by John Gallus. He will be interviewed by Robin Marsack. So that's at 7 p.m. on Wednesday evening. Just check the website for details. So thanks again. Thanks, Michael and Mary and Stephen. Congratulations. And it's good night from all of us.